Hello dear listeners, and welcome to the return of One Flick at a Time. Before I get on with the episode, a quick update for the rest of the year. One Flick at a Time, the second series, 1930s, is beginning right now. The 1930s should be concluded before the end of the year, but also the podcasts are back, one having been released already, and there are more on the way, at least 2 or 3 more. Series 1 of the podcast should conclude in November. One Flick at a Time should conclude late November or early December before a break over the holidays, and both shows returning somewhere early in the new year. Each week, the release days have been changed from Friday to Thursday, just so it's in line with some upcoming movie releases, as the films are being released on Thursdays generally. And each week there will be a new episode. There might be One Flick at a Time one week, the next week the podcast. It might go back and forth just depending on what's coming up, but there will always be something out each week from here on out. If there's a bit of an overlap, I might even have one episode of each in 1 week. We'll see how we go. Now on with the episode. Join me as I traverse 100 years of horror cinema, one flick at a time. We commence the 1930s, one of the most prominent decades in cinema history, with an obscure film. Another journey to Germany, this one for Alraune, 1930. This legend was turned into a novel in the early 20th century and had various film adaptations. The 1928 silent film, which incidentally I've just received on DVD and look forward to looking at, was met with controversy and remade 2 years later, including some of the same cast and crew. It is this version to which we are focused on for today's episode. Essentially, this was an early mad scientist does a thing movie. Only 12 months before Frankenstein hits the screens, we have a man who has absconded with the money from a princess to create a human in a lab using genetic material from a prostitute and a murderer. So it's basically IVF, but in black and white and German. It bears mentioning that finding a version with translations is rather difficult, and this probably constitutes the most obscure film discussed on the show thus far. The 1928 version was directed by the man who wrote Nosferatu. This version has a pedigree all its own, but sadly does not live up to it. The film suffers from, typical of the time, static camera work. New talkie cameras were cumbersome and hampered otherwise creative directors. This version is somewhat controversial as well, using the word pimp would not have flown in the US even in a pre-Hays Code era that would formalize restrictions and censorship. It also features various musical interludes that are adequately performed, but are straining to the ears as the sound quality has not withstood well the test of time. Some interesting editing brings the film to life during a car chase sequence. Some close-ups and creative use of lighting bring some delight to an otherwise flat experience. The titular woman created in a lab is effectively soulless. She has no empathy for others and tempts men throughout her life. This leads to their demise in slow expository scenes. The commentary on sex and temptation of same is obvious. The controversial content does not disguise the Puritan messaging. Female characters in Hollywood would always have to suffer by the end of the picture. Tempt men, yes, but you shall not succeed in the long run. This film is not quite so concerned with this karmic realignment. Ultimately, what dooms this film to mediocrity is not being low quality in another language. The meandering plot, unimaginative direction of actors, and series of exposition scenes that seem to never end are what ultimately make this a hard film to recommend. As for kicking off a genre of science fiction horror films, it deserves some recognition. However, the 1930s were about to herald a new and spectacular age for cinema goers, and the British and Americans were to be at the forefront. Alraune is for hardcore film history enthusiasts only. Enjoy!